The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand estate as Camilla Windsor sat at her mahogany writing desk, her heart racing with anticipation. At 28, she was the youngest daughter of Lord Windsor, one of England's most respected noble families. Her life had always been carefully planned and controlled, every decision made by her father to maintain the family's pristine reputation. But today was different. Today, she was expecting a letter that could change everything. Camilla had lived her entire life within the confines of high society expectations. Every morning began the same way. Breakfast in the formal dining room with her parents, discussions about charitable events and social gatherings, and careful preparation for whatever public appearance awaited her. The Windsor name carried weight in London's elite circles, and Camilla knew that her every move was scrutinized by both the press and society matrons who had nothing better to do than gossip about the lives of others. Her bedroom was a sanctuary of cream silk and gold accents, overlooking the perfectly manicured gardens that stretched toward the River Thames. Crystal chandeliers caught the morning light, creating dancing rainbows across the walls. Despite all this luxury, Camilla often felt like a prisoner in a beautiful cage. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her quickly close the book she had been pretending to read. Her personal maid Mary entered with a silver tray containing tea and correspondence. "Good morning, Miss Camilla," Mary said with a warm smile. "Your father requests your presence in the library at 11 o'clock. He mentioned something about discussing your upcoming engagement announcement." Camilla's stomach dropped. For months, her parents had been pressuring her to accept the marriage proposal from Charles Pemberton, the eldest son of another wealthy family. Charles was everything her parents wanted in a son-in-law: wealthy, titled, and completely boring. Their few conversations had been painfully awkward, filled with discussions about weather and his passion for collecting antique clocks. "Did any letters arrive for me?" Camilla asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Mary glanced around nervously before pulling a small envelope from beneath the tea service. "This came through the back entrance, miss. The delivery boy said it was urgent and personal." Camilla's hands trembled slightly as she took the letter. The handwriting was familiar, bold and confident, so different from the careful script she had been taught in finishing school. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she carefully opened the seal. The letter was from James Sullivan, and just seeing his name written in his own hand made her feel alive in a way that terrified and thrilled her simultaneously. 3 months earlier, Camilla had been visiting the local village with her mother to distribute charity baskets when she first saw James. He was working as a carpenter, helping to repair the roof of the old church. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong arms bronzed by hours of outdoor work. When he looked up and their eyes met, something electric passed between them that Camilla had never experienced before. James was everything her family would disapprove of. He was a commoner, a working man who earned his living with his hands rather than inheriting wealth. His family had no title, no social standing, no connections that could benefit the Windsor name. In her world, he simply did not exist, but Camilla found herself drawn to him like a moth to flame. She began making excuses to visit the village, always accompanied by Mary, who had sworn to keep her secrets. James would find ways to be wherever she was, helping at the market, assisting with church repairs, or simply walking the paths she was known to frequent. Their first real conversation happened during a village festival. While her parents were occupied with other noble families, Camilla had slipped away to watch the folk dancing. James appeared beside her, offering her a cup of cider and a smile that made her forget every rule she had ever been taught about proper behavior. They talked for hours that evening, hidden in the shadows beyond the festival lights. James told her about his dreams of starting his own carpentry business, about the houses he wanted to build, about seeing the world beyond the village boundaries. Camilla shared her love of literature, her secret desire to write novels, and her frustration with the limitations placed on her because of her gender and social position. In James, she found someone who listened to her ideas without trying to correct or dismiss them. He encouraged her creativity and treated her opinions as valuable. For the first time in her life, she felt seen as a person, rather than just a titled ornament designed to enhance her family's status. Their meetings became more frequent and more secretive. They would meet in the old gamekeeper's cottage at the edge of the estate, a place that had been abandoned for years. James would bring wildflowers he had picked along the way, and Camilla would bring books to share with him. He was intelligent and well-read despite his lack of formal education, and their conversations ranged from philosophy to dreams of the future. Now, holding his latest letter, Camilla felt the familiar mixture of joy and terror that came with their forbidden relationship. She unfolded the paper and read his words, each sentence pulling her deeper into a world where social boundaries meant nothing. The letter spoke of his growing feelings for her, his frustration with the secrecy their relationship required, and his desperate desire to find a way they could be together openly. He wrote about a small cottage he had found in a distant village where they could start fresh, away from the expectations and judgments of their current world. As she read, Camilla realized that James was asking her to make an impossible choice. He was asking her to abandon everything she had ever known, to give up her family, her inheritance, and her place in society for love. The sound of her father's voice in the hallway brought her crashing back to reality. She quickly hid the letter in her jewelry box and tried to compose herself. In a few hours, she would be expected to sit politely while her parents discussed her future marriage to a man she could never love. But now she had another option, one that terrified and excited her in equal measure. The question was whether she had the courage to take it. The library meeting with her father went exactly as Camilla had feared. Lord Windsor sat behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by leather-bound books and family portraits that seemed to watch her with disapproving eyes. The room smelled of tobacco and old paper, a scent that usually comforted her but now felt suffocating. "Camilla, my dear," her father began, his voice carrying the authority that had built the Windsor fortune over 3 generations. "Charles Pemberton has formally requested your hand in marriage. The announcement will appear in the Times next week, and the wedding is planned for early spring." She sat rigid in the burgundy leather chair, her hands folded perfectly in her lap as she had been taught since childhood. "Father, I haven't given Charles an answer yet. Surely I should have some say in whom I marry?" Lord Windsor's eyebrows rose slightly. In his world, daughters did not question their father's decisions about marriage. These unions were business arrangements designed to strengthen family positions and increase wealth. Love was a luxury that common people indulged in, not something that concerned the nobility. "You have had months to get to know Charles. He is wealthy, well-connected, and comes from excellent breeding. What more could you possibly want?" Her father's tone suggested that the discussion was over. But something had changed in Camilla since she began meeting James. She had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, a voice that refused to be silenced completely. "I want to marry someone I actually care about," she said quietly. "Someone who sees me as more than just a way to combine family fortunes." The silence that followed was deafening. Lord Windsor set down his pen and studied his daughter as if seeing her for the first time.
"Camilla, you are being foolish."
Love is a fleeting emotion. Respect, compatibility, and mutual benefit are what make marriages last. Charles will treat you well and provide you with the lifestyle you deserve. That afternoon, Camilla escaped to the village under the pretense of visiting the elderly Mrs. Patterson, a former servant who had helped raise her. But instead of going to Mrs. Patterson's cottage, she made her way to the old gamekeeper's lodge where James was waiting. He was sitting on the stone steps, whittling a small wooden bird. When he saw her approaching, his face lit up with the kind of genuine joy that Charles Pemberton would never inspire in anyone. James stood and pulled her into his arms, and for a moment all of Camilla's worries disappeared. "I got your letter," she whispered against his chest. "James, what you're asking? It's impossible." He pulled back to look at her face, his calloused hands gentle against her cheeks. "Nothing is impossible if we want it badly enough. I've been making plans, Camilla. I have enough money saved to buy that cottage I told you about. It's small, but it's in a beautiful valley where no one knows us. We could start over." The cottage he described sounded like paradise compared to the suffocating world of social obligations and arranged marriages that awaited her at home. But Camilla also understood what leaving would mean. "My family would disown me," she said. "I would lose everything. My inheritance, my name, my place in society. They would never forgive me for bringing shame to the Windsor reputation." James took her hands in his blue eyes serious and determined. "And what would you gain? Freedom to choose your own life. A husband who loves you for who you are, not what your family name can do for him." children who will be raised with love instead of duty. They walked together through the woods, talking about the life they could build together. James painted pictures with his words. Morning coffee shared in a sunny kitchen, evenings by the fireplace reading together, a garden where they could grow their own vegetables. It sounded simple and beautiful and completely terrifying. When would we leave? Camilla found herself asking, surprising herself with the question. Soon, James replied. Before your engagement is announced. Once that happens, your father will watch you too closely. We would have to leave within the week. A week. 7 days to decide whether to abandon everything she had ever known for love. The weight of the decision felt crushing. When Camilla returned home that evening, her mother was waiting in her bedroom. Lady Windsor sat elegantly on the silk-covered settee, her expression unreadable. Where have you been, Camilla? Mary said you went to visit Mrs. Patterson, but when I sent a servant to check on you, Mrs. Patterson said she hadn't seen you today. Camilla's heart raced, but she forced her voice to remain steady. I took a walk through the village after visiting. I needed time to think about Father's announcement. Her mother studied her for a long moment. Lady Windsor was not easily fooled, and Camilla realized she would need to be much more careful. Camilla, I hope you understand how fortunate you are. Charles Pemberton could have his choice of any young woman in London society. The fact that he has chosen you reflects very well on our family. Yes, Mother, Camilla replied, because it was what was expected. But that night, as she lay in her luxurious bed staring at the ceiling, Camilla's mind raced with possibilities and fears. She thought about James probably lying in his simple bed in the village, dreaming of their future together. She thought about Charles Pemberton, likely planning their wedding without any input from her whatsoever. She pulled James's letter from her jewelry box and read it again by candlelight. His words were passionate and hopeful, full of dreams for their future. He wrote about building her a writing desk by the window of their cottage, about long walks through meadows, about growing old together. Then she thought about the alternative, a life of elegant dinner parties and charity events, raising children who would be taught to value duty over happiness, slowly forgetting that she had ever dreamed of anything different. The choice seemed impossible, but as the night wore on, Camilla began to realize that perhaps the real impossibility was continuing to live a life that felt like a beautifully decorated prison. By dawn, she had made her decision. The next 3 days passed in a blur of careful planning and growing anxiety. Camilla went through the motions of her normal routine while secretly preparing for the most dramatic decision of her life. She attended tea with her mother's friends, smiled politely during dinner conversations about her upcoming engagement, and helped plan charity events as if her world wasn't about to change completely. But every spare moment was spent thinking about James and their escape plan. They had agreed to meet every evening at sunset near the old oak tree at the edge of the estate. These meetings had become the highlight of her days, the only time she felt truly alive. James had been busy making arrangements. He had already given notice at his current job and purchased train tickets to the distant village where their new cottage waited. He showed her sketches he had drawn of how they could arrange the furniture, where she could set up her writing space, and how they would expand the small garden. "Are you certain about this?" he asked her during their third meeting, his voice gentle but serious. "Once we leave, there will be no going back. Your family will likely never forgive you." Camilla had thought about nothing else for days. She understood the magnitude of what she was choosing. In her world, unmarried women who ran away with unsuitable men were considered ruined, cast out of society forever. She would lose her inheritance, her social connections, and quite possibly any chance of reconciliation with her family. But she had also realized something important during these days of reflection. The life her parents had planned for her wasn't really living at all. It was performing a role, following a script written by generations of people who valued appearance over happiness. "I'm certain," she told James, taking his hands in hers, "I would rather have 1 year of real happiness with you than 50 years of elegant misery with Charles." They set their departure for Friday evening. James would wait with a carriage at the old bridge that crossed the river at the boundary of the Windsor estate. Camilla would pack only essential items in a small bag that she could carry easily. They would travel through the night to reach the train station in a neighboring town, then continue their journey to their new home. The plan seemed perfect, But Camilla had underestimated how well her mother knew her. On Thursday evening, Lady Windsor knocked on her daughter's bedroom door just as Camilla was carefully selecting which pieces of jewelry she could take without being obvious about it. "Camilla, dear, may I come in?" Quickly hiding the small travel bag under her bed, Camilla opened the door with what she hoped was a normal expression. Her mother entered and sat on the bed, patting the space beside her. "Sit with me. I want to discuss something important." Camilla's heart hammered as she sat down, trying to appear calm and attentive. "I've been watching you these past few days," Lady Windsor began, her voice gentle but knowing. "You seem different, distracted. Your father thinks it's simply nervousness about the engagement announcement. But I know you better than that." The silence stretched between them as Camilla struggled to find words that wouldn't give away her plans. "Mother, I'm fine, perhaps a little overwhelmed by how quickly everything is happening." Lady Windsor studied her daughter's face carefully. "Camilla, I was young once too. I understand that the idea of marriage to someone you barely know can be frightening. But you must trust that your father and I want what's best for you. What if what's best for me isn't what's best for the family name?" The words slipped out before Camilla could stop them. Her mother's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Is there something you need to tell me? Someone you've met, perhaps?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Camilla realized that her mother suspected something, but wasn't sure how much she actually knew. "I just think I should have some choice in who I spend my life with," Camilla said carefully. Lady Windsor was quiet for a long moment, then reached over and took her daughter's hand. "Camilla, I'm going to tell you something I've never shared before. When I was your age, I fancied myself in love with a young man who was completely unsuitable. He was charming and romantic, and I thought I would die if I couldn't be with him." Camilla's blood ran cold. Was her mother talking about someone like James? "What happened?" she whispered. "I was foolish enough to believe that love was more important than anything else. I made plans to run away with him." Lady Windsor's voice became distant, as if she was reliving an old pain. "But my parents discovered our plan before I could act on it. They sent me away to visit relatives for several months, and when I returned, he had moved on to someone else." The story hit Camilla like a physical blow. "Were you heartbroken?" "For a time, yes. But then I met your father, and I realized that what I had mistaken for love was simply infatuation. Your father offered me stability, respect, and a good life. We grew to love each other in a way that was much deeper than the passionate feelings I had for that young man." Lady Windsor squeezed her daughter's hand. "Whatever you think you're feeling for someone, remember that emotions fade. But the consequences of rash decisions last forever." After her mother left, Camilla sat on her bed feeling shaken and confused. Was her mother right? Was what she felt for James just infatuation that would fade over time? Or was her mother's story a warning about what happened when people gave up on love too easily? She thought about the conversations she had shared with James, the way he listened to her ideas and encouraged her dreams. She thought about Charles Pemberton, who had never asked her a single question about her thoughts or interests. She thought about the cottage James had described, where she could write and think and be herself, versus the grand but suffocating mansion where she would be expected to host dinner parties and produce appropriate heirs. No, what she felt for James wasn't just infatuation. It was recognition, the feeling of finding someone who saw and valued the real her, not just the polished version that had been created for public consumption. But her mother's story had planted a seed of doubt. What if she was making a terrible mistake? What if she regretted this decision for the rest of her life? As she prepared for bed, Camilla realized that tomorrow evening would either be the beginning of her real life or the biggest mistake she had ever made. The uncertainty was terrifying, but the thought of spending her life wondering what if was even worse. She would keep her appointment with James at the bridge. Whatever happened after that, at least she would know she had been brave enough to choose her own path. Friday dawned gray and misty, matching Camilla's anxious mood. She woke before sunrise, her stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and terror. Today would either be the last day of her old life, or the day she came to her senses and abandoned the most reckless plan she had ever conceived. The household bustled with unusual activity. Servants hurried through the hallways carrying flowers and decorations, preparing for the formal engagement party that would be held the following evening. The irony wasn't lost on Camilla. While everyone prepared to celebrate her engagement to Charles, she was planning to disappear with another man entirely. During breakfast, her father seemed unusually cheerful, discussing plans for the wedding ceremony and the guest list that would include half of London's high society. Charles would be arriving that afternoon to discuss final details and present. Her with the family engagement ring, a massive emerald that had been worn by Pemberton brides for 5 generations. "You'll look beautiful wearing it, my dear," Lord Windsor said, buttering his toast. "The emerald will complement your eyes perfectly." Camilla could barely manage to swallow her tea. Every word about the engagement felt like another chain being forged around her future. Her mother watched her carefully throughout the meal, and Camilla wondered if Lady Windsor was still suspicious about her behavior. She tried to act normally, discussing the weather and asking appropriate questions about the party preparations, but she could feel her mother's eyes studying her every expression. After breakfast, Camilla retreated to her room to make final preparations. She had hidden a small traveling bag behind her wardrobe, packed with only the most essential items, a few changes of clothes, her grandmother's pearl necklace, the only jewelry that held sentimental rather than monetary value, her favorite books and the letters James had written her. She also wrote 2 letters of her own. The first was to her parents, trying to explain her decision without hurting them more than necessary. She wrote about her need to choose her own path, her gratitude for everything they had given her, and her hope that someday they might understand and forgive her. The second letter was to Mary, thanking her for her loyalty and friendship and asking her to wait several hours before delivering the first letter to her parents. This would give James and her enough time to reach safety before anyone came looking for them. Around noon, Charles Pemberton arrived in his elegant carriage. Camilla watched from her window as he stepped down, perfectly dressed and completely confident that his future bride would be waiting eagerly for his visit. The sight of him made her feel sick with guilt and determination in equal measure. She was summoned to the drawing room to receive him formally. Charles kissed her hand politely and made conversation about the weather and his recent trip to London. He presented her with a bouquet of expensive hothouse roses and spoke about his excitement for their upcoming marriage. "I've been thinking about our wedding trip," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Perhaps Italy would be suitable. My mother recommends Venice for honeymoons." Camilla nodded and smiled, making appropriate responses while her mind raced. In a few hours she would be gone, and Charles would face the humiliation of a publicly jilted engagement. She felt terrible about the embarrassment she would cause him, but she also knew that marrying him would be unfair to both of them. The afternoon seemed to crawl by. Camilla attended to her usual activities: a walk in the gardens with her mother, tea with visiting friends of the family, and preparation for dinner. But every moment felt surreal, as if she was watching someone else go through the motions of being the perfect daughter. During dinner, her father announced that the engagement would be formally announced in the newspaper the following day, and that he expected a large crowd at tomorrow's party. Charles looked pleased and confident, discussing their future as if it was already decided. "Camilla has always been such a dutiful daughter," Lady Windsor commented, still watching her carefully. "I'm sure she'll be equally devoted as a wife." The words felt like both a compliment and a warning. Camilla managed to smile and thank her mother, while inside she felt like screaming. After dinner, Charles took his leave, kissing her hand again and reminding her that he would see her tomorrow evening for the party. "Sleep well, my dear," he said. "Tomorrow begins our new life together." As the evening wore on, Camilla's anxiety reached almost unbearable levels. She helped Mary arrange her room for the night, chatted with her parents about tomorrow's party, and went through all the normal routines of preparing for bed. But her traveling bag remained hidden, waiting for the moment when she would either grab it and run toward freedom, or unpack it and accept the life that had been chosen for her. At 10 o'clock, she dismissed Mary for the night and locked her bedroom door. She changed from her dinner dress into a simple traveling outfit, a dark blue dress that would be less noticeable than her usual elegant gowns. She pinned her hair back severely and covered it with a plain bonnet that would help disguise her appearance. As the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10:30, Camilla picked up her bag and the letters she had written. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold them steady. This was it. In 15 minutes, she needed to be at the old bridge where James would be waiting with the carriage that would take them away from everything she had ever known. She opened her bedroom window and looked out at the moonlit gardens. The route to the bridge would take her through the rose garden, past the conservatory, and along the river path. If anyone saw her, the plan would be ruined. Taking one last look around her beautiful bedroom, Camilla whispered goodbye to the life she was leaving behind. Then she climbed carefully out the window onto the sturdy ivy trellis that had helped her sneak out for childhood adventures. Her feet touched the ground, and there was no turning back. As she hurried through the shadows toward the bridge, Camilla's heart pounded with fear and excitement. In a few minutes, she would know whether love was strong enough to overcome the expectations of an entire world. The journey through the moonlit gardens felt like walking through a dream. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential witness. Every sound made Camilla's heart skip with fear that she had been discovered. She kept to the darker paths, avoiding the main walkways where the gravel would crunch loudly under her feet. As she approached the old stone bridge, she could see a figure waiting in the darkness. James stepped forward into the moonlight, and the relief on his face when he saw her was unmistakable. He had been uncertain until this very moment whether she would actually come. "Camilla," he whispered, taking her traveling bag and pulling her into his arms. "I was beginning to think you had changed your mind." "I almost did, a dozen times," she admitted, her voice shaking with adrenaline and emotion. "But I'm here now." The carriage James had hired was small and plain, nothing like the elegant vehicles she was accustomed to. The driver, a weathered man who asked no questions, simply nodded when James told him they were ready to depart. As they settled into the uncomfortable seats, Camilla looked back at the Windsor estate one last time. The windows of her family home glowed warmly in the distance, and she could imagine her parents settling in for the evening, completely unaware that their daughter was disappearing into the night. The first few miles passed in nervous silence. Camilla kept expecting to hear the sound of pursuing horses, to see torches in the distance as search parties came after them. But the countryside remained peaceful, with only the clip-clop of their horses' hooves and the creaking of the carriage wheels to break the silence. "Tell me about the cottage again," Camilla said, needing to focus on their destination rather than what she was leaving behind. James took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and reassuring. "It sits on a small hill overlooking a valley. There's a stream that runs along the bottom, and the previous owner planted fruit trees around the house. The village is small, maybe 50 families, and far enough from any major town that no one will know or care about our past." He painted the picture with words, describing the stone fireplace where they would spend winter evenings, the sunny kitchen with its view of the garden, and the small room upstairs that would be perfect for her writing. It sounded like paradise, but Camilla couldn't shake the feeling that she was making the biggest mistake of her life. They reached the train station just as the midnight express was preparing to depart. James had purchased their tickets in advance, booking passage to a town called Millbrook nearly 200 miles away. As they boarded the train, Camilla pulled her bonnet low over her face, terrified that someone might recognize her even at this late hour. The train compartment was small and cramped, nothing like the luxurious private cars her family used for travel, but as the train pulled away from the station, carrying her farther from her old life with each passing mile, Camilla began to feel something she had never experienced before, the terrifying, exhilarating sensation of complete freedom. "Are you sorry?" James asked as they settled in for the long journey. Camilla considered the question carefully. "Ask me again in a year," she said. "Right now, I'm too scared to be sorry about anything." They talked through the night as the train carried them across the English countryside. James told her more about his plans for starting his carpentry business, about the commissions he hoped to get from local farmers and merchants. Camilla shared her dreams of writing novels, stories that would be published under her own name rather than hidden away in private journals. But as dawn broke over unfamiliar landscapes, reality began to set in. Camilla realized that she had never lived anywhere but the Windsor estate. She had never shopped for groceries, never cooked a meal, never managed a household budget. The practical aspects of her new life seemed suddenly overwhelming. "James," she said hesitantly, "I should probably tell you that I don't know how to do most ordinary things. I've never cooked or cleaned or managed money. What if I'm completely useless as a wife?" James smiled and squeezed her hand. "Then we'll learn together. I don't know how to be married to a lady either. We'll figure it out as we go. They arrived in Millbrook just after sunrise. The town was even smaller than James had described. A main street with a few shops, a church, an inn, and perhaps 20 houses scattered around the surrounding hills. It was nothing like the bustling social scene of London, and for a moment Camilla felt panic rising in her chest. The cottage James had purchased sat on a hill about a mile outside town. It was smaller than the servant quarters at her family estate, but it was charming in its simplicity. Stone walls covered with climbing roses, a slate roof that gleamed in the morning sun, and windows that looked out over a pastoral valley where sheep grazed peacefully. "Welcome home," James said as he helped her down from the hired cart they had taken from the train station. Home. The word felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. This tiny cottage was now her entire world, and the man beside her was her only family. As they stood looking at their new home, Camilla realized that there would be no grand ballrooms here, no servants to anticipate her every need, no social calendar filled with obligations and expectations. There would also be no safety net, no family fortune to fall back on, and no social position to protect her from the consequences of her choices. But there would be love. And for the first time in her life, there would be the freedom to discover who she really was when no one was watching or judging or telling her how to behave. James produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the front door. "Shall we go inside and see what we've gotten ourselves into?" he asked with a grin. Camilla took a deep breath, picked up her skirts, and stepped across the threshold into her new life. Behind them, the sun rose higher, burning away the mist and illuminating the valley with golden light. Whatever challenges lay ahead, at least she would face them as herself with the person she had chosen to love. The first 3 weeks in the cottage passed like a whirlwind of discovery and adjustment. Camilla learned to cook simple meals over the wood-burning stove, often burning bread or oversalting soup, while James patiently ate whatever she prepared and complimented her efforts. She learned to sweep floors, wash dishes, and hang laundry on the line behind the house. Every task that had been invisible to her in her previous life now became a small adventure. The first time she successfully baked a loaf of bread without burning it, she felt more accomplished than she had after any charity ball or social gathering. James was patient and encouraging, teaching her practical skills while never making her feel foolish for not knowing things that seemed obvious to him. He showed her how to tend the vegetable garden, how to preserve fruit for winter, and how to manage their modest household budget. In the evenings, they would sit by the fireplace and read together, sharing books and discussing everything from philosophy to local village gossip. Camilla had set up a writing desk by the window as James had promised, and she began working on a novel about a young woman who had to choose between duty and desire. But their peaceful existence was shattered on a rainy Tuesday morning when Camilla spotted a familiar figure approaching their cottage. Thomas Fairfax, head of security for the Windsor estate, was riding up the hill with another man she didn't recognize. "James," she called, her voice tight with panic. "Someone's coming." James emerged from the workshop he had built behind the cottage, saw the approaching riders, and immediately understood the danger. They had always known this moment might come, but they had hoped they would have more time to establish themselves before Camilla's family tracked them down. "Stay calm," James said, taking her hand. "We knew this might happen. We'll face it together." Thomas Fairfax dismounted and approached the cottage with the grim expression of a man carrying out an unpleasant duty. He had known Camilla since she was a child, and the pain in his eyes was evident despite his professional demeanor. "Miss Camilla," he said formally, "your father has sent me to bring you home." "This is my home now," Camilla replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I'm not going back." The second man stepped forward, introducing himself as a constable from the nearest large town. "Miss Windsor, there's been a complaint filed. Your father claims you were taken against your will and are being held here unwillingly." James stepped protectively in front of Camilla. "She came here of her own free will. No one forced her to do anything." "That may be," the constable said, "but we'll need to investigate the complaint properly." "Miss Windsor, are you here willingly or have you been coerced in any way?" "I came here by my own choice," Camilla said clearly. "No one forced me to leave my family's home. I left because I wanted to marry this man and build a life with him." Thomas Fairfax looked uncomfortable. "Miss Camilla, your father is willing to overlook this incident. If you return home immediately, the engagement to Mr. Pemberton has been postponed but not cancelled. You can still salvage your reputation and your future. My reputation was never mine to begin with, Camilla replied. It belonged to my family's name and social position. And as for my future, I'm living it right here. The constable looked around the modest cottage, taking in the simple furnishings and humble surroundings. Miss Windsor, are you certain you understand what you're giving up? Your family is offering you a return to wealth and comfort. Camilla looked at James, then back at the two men who represented her old world. I understand exactly what I'm giving up, and I know exactly what I'm choosing instead. I would rather live simply with someone who loves me than live in luxury with someone who sees me as a business arrangement. But Thomas Fairfax had one more card to play, one that Camilla had not anticipated. Miss Camilla, he said gently, your mother is ill. She collapsed after reading your letter and has been bedridden for a week. The doctor says it's her heart. She's been asking for you. The news hit Camilla like a physical blow. Her mother, ill because of her decision to leave. The guilt was overwhelming and she felt her resolve beginning to waver. How ill? She whispered. Serious enough that your father sent me to find you immediately, Thomas replied. She needs to see that you're safe and well. After that, if you still choose to stay here, perhaps we can discuss a more reasonable arrangement. James squeezed her hand, understanding the conflict raging in her heart. Camilla, you have to do what you think is right. The constable sensed an opportunity. Miss Windsor, perhaps you could return home to see your mother and resolve this family matter properly. Then, if you still wish to return here, that would be your choice as an adult woman. Camilla felt torn between two impossible choices. Stay with James and risk her mother's death being on her conscience forever, or return home and risk never being allowed to leave again. If I go back, she said carefully, what guarantee do I have that I'll be free to return here if I choose? Thomas Fairfax looked uncomfortable again. Miss Camilla, I can only promise that I'll do everything in my power to ensure you're treated fairly. It wasn't the guarantee she wanted, but Camilla realized she had no real choice. She couldn't live with herself if her mother died while she was estranged from her family. I'll come, she said finally, but James comes with me. If my mother wants to see that I'm safe and well, she needs to meet the man I've chosen to marry. The constable shook his head. I'm afraid that's not possible. Your father was very specific about bringing you home alone. Then I'm not going, Camilla said firmly. Either James comes with me or I stay here. Thomas Fairfax looked frustrated. He had hoped to complete his mission without complications, but Camilla was proving to be as stubborn as her father. After a long moment of consideration, he nodded reluctantly. Very well, but the young man will need to understand that he's entering a hostile situation. Your father is not pleased with him. As they prepared to leave the cottage that had been their sanctuary for 3 weeks, Camilla felt like she was walking into a trap. But her mother's health left her no choice. She packed a small bag while James secured the cottage and arranged for a neighbor to tend their garden. As they climbed into the carriage that would take them back to her old world, Camilla couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to lose everything she had fought so hard to gain. The journey back to the Windsor estate felt like traveling backward through time. With each mile, Camilla felt the weight of her old world pressing down on her shoulders. The countryside that had seemed so liberating during her escape now felt like a path leading back to prison. James sat beside her in the carriage, his hand steady and reassuring in hers, but she could see the tension in his jaw. He was entering enemy territory, and they both knew it. As the familiar towers of the Windsor estate came into view, Camilla's heart began to race. The grand mansion looked exactly the same, but she felt like a completely different person than the woman who had climbed out of her bedroom window 3 weeks earlier. The carriage rolled up the circular drive, past the manicured gardens and ornate fountains that had once been the boundaries of her entire world. Servants gathered at the windows, whispering and staring as they recognized the prodigal daughter returning home. Lord Windsor was waiting on the front steps, his face a mask of controlled fury. Beside him stood Charles Pemberton, looking pale and uncomfortable. The sight of her former fiancé made Camilla realize how much her perspective had changed. 3 weeks ago she had thought of him as boring but harmless. Now he looked like a symbol of everything she had rejected. Camilla, her father said as she stepped down from the carriage, his voice carefully controlled. I trust you're prepared to explain yourself. I'm prepared to see Mother, Camilla replied, matching his formal tone. Thomas said she was ill. Lord Windsor's eyes shifted to James, who had stepped protectively beside Camilla. And you brought this person with you. James Sullivan, James said, extending his hand in a gesture that was both polite and defiant. I'm the man who plans to marry your daughter. Lord Windsor ignored the offered handshake. You're the man who corrupted my daughter and convinced her to abandon her family and her responsibilities. Father, Camilla interrupted, James didn't corrupt me. I made my own choices. Choices that nearly killed your mother. Lord Windsor snapped, his composure finally cracking. She collapsed when she read your letter. The doctor says her heart may be permanently damaged. The guilt hit Camilla like a physical blow, but she forced herself to stand straight. Then take me to see her. That's why I came back. Charles Pemberton stepped forward awkwardly. Camilla, I'm glad you're safe. I've been terribly worried. The concern in his voice was genuine, and Camilla felt a stab of guilt for the humiliation she had caused him. Charles, I'm sorry for the way I left. You didn't deserve to be treated that way. Perhaps we can discuss this inside, Lord Windsor said, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the conversation. Servants and neighbors were undoubtedly watching from every window. They were escorted into the familiar grandeur of the Windsor mansion. The marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and priceless artwork that had once been simply part of her daily environment now felt overwhelming after the simple beauty of the cottage. Lady Windsor was indeed bedridden, looking pale and fragile against the silk pillows of her massive four-poster bed. When she saw Camilla enter the room, tears immediately filled her eyes. My darling girl, she whispered, extending her arms. I was so frightened that something terrible had happened to you. Camilla rushed to her mother's bedside, feeling like a child again as she was enveloped in familiar arms. I'm sorry, Mother. I'm so sorry you were worried. When I read your letter, Lady Windsor said softly, I thought we had lost you forever. The thought of never seeing you again. My heart simply couldn't bear it. Looking at her mother's weakened condition, Camilla felt the full weight of what her decision had cost. She had been so focused on her own desire for freedom that she hadn't fully considered how much pain her departure would cause the people who loved her. I'm here now, she whispered. I'm safe. Lady Windsor's eyes moved to James, who stood respectfully near the door. Is this the young man? Yes, Mother. This is James. Her mother studied him for a long moment, taking in his simple clothes and calloused hands. You're the carpenter who stole my daughter's heart? I didn't steal anything, my lady, James replied respectfully. Your daughter chose to come with me. I would never have asked her to if I hadn't believed I could make her happy. Happy, Lady Windsor repeated the word as if it were foreign. And do you believe you can provide for her properly? Give her the life she deserves? Maybe not the life she's accustomed to, James admitted honestly. But I can give her a life where she's valued for who she is, not what her family name represents. Lord Windsor, who had been listening from the corner of the room, finally exploded. How dare you stand in my house and criticize the way we've raised our daughter? We've given her everything, education, culture, opportunities that someone of your station could never provide. Everything except the right to choose her own future, James replied calmly. The tension in the room was suffocating. Camilla could see that this confrontation was exactly what she had feared. Two completely different worlds colliding with no possibility of understanding. But then her mother spoke, her voice weak but determined. William, she said to her husband, perhaps we should listen to what they have to say. Over the next hour, an extraordinary conversation took place. Camilla explained her feelings about the arranged marriage, her desire for independence, and her love for James. James spoke about his ambitions, his plans for providing for Camilla, and his respect for her intelligence and spirit. Lord Windsor remained largely silent, his face growing darker with each revelation. But Lady Windsor asked questions, really listening to the answers. She asked about the cottage, about Camilla's daily life, about their plans for the future. Finally, Charles Pemberton, who had been forgotten in the corner, cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should speak," he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him, surprised. Charles had always been soft-spoken to the point of invisibility. "I've been thinking about this situation for 3 weeks," he continued, "and I've realized something important. Camilla was never going to be happy married to me. I could see it in her eyes every time we were together. She was polite and proper, but she was never really there." He looked directly at Camilla. "I want a wife who chooses me, who loves me, who wants to build a life with me. That was never going to be you, was it?" Camilla shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Charles. You deserve so much better than someone who was only marrying you out of duty." "Then I formally withdraw my proposal," Charles said, turning to Lord Windsor. "I think we should let Camilla choose her own path, even if it's not the path we would have chosen for her." The room fell silent. Lord Windsor looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His carefully laid plans, his dreams of uniting two great families, his vision of his daughter's future, all of it was crumbling around him. But Lady Windsor reached over and took her husband's hand. "William, we raised her to be intelligent and strong. Perhaps we should trust her judgment." After a long moment, Lord Windsor spoke, his voice heavy with resignation and sadness. "If this is truly what you want, Camilla, then I won't stand in your way. But understand that there will be consequences. Society will not accept this choice easily." "I understand," Camilla said, "but I'd rather face those consequences than live a lie." Her father nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing, though it goes against everything I believe is right for you." As the sun set over the Windsor estate, Camilla realized that she had gained something she never expected, her family's reluctant acceptance of her choice. It wasn't the fairy tale ending she had dreamed of, but it was real, honest, and built on love rather than obligation. The next morning, she and James would return to their cottage, this time with the knowledge that she would always have a place in her family's hearts, even if she could never again have a place in their world. Love had won, but at a cost that would take years to fully understand.